There's a pattern you see everywhere once you start looking for it. The people who carry the most are the ones who never have time for themselves. Not because they're disorganized, not because they're bad at planning, but because they've built their entire identity around being the one who holds everything together. And when your identity depends on being needed, rest becomes impossible. You know these people. Maybe you are one of them. The friend everyone calls when things fall apart. The coworker who always says yes. The family member who shows up no matter what. The partner who absorbs everyone's emotions. They're the glue, the anchor, the reliable one. And they're exhausted in a way that sleep can't fix. This isn't about time management. It's about something deeper, something psychological, something that Carl Jung would recognize immediately. Because the person who carries everything isn't just helping others. They're hiding from themselves. Alan Watts once said that the ego is a social institution with no physical reality. The chief task of the ego is to pretend that it has one. And for the person who carries everything, the ego's pretending takes a very specific form. It pretends that being needed is the same as being valuable, that exhaustion is proof of worth, that if you stop carrying, you'll discover there's nothing underneath. Think about it. When was the last time the reliable person in your life said no? When was the last time they prioritized their own needs without guilt? When was the last time they admitted they were tired, not just physically, but existentially? They don't. Because saying no would mean confronting a terrifying question. If I'm not the one who carries everything, who am I? This is the psychology of the overburdened, and it's more common than you think. Because modern society doesn't just allow this pattern, it rewards it. We celebrate the martyr. We praise the workaholic. We admire the person who sacrifices themselves for others. We call them selfless. We call them strong. We never ask if they're okay. But Jung would ask. He'd ask what shadow is being avoided. What part of the self is so unbearable that constant service to others feels safer than sitting alone with your own thoughts? Because that's what this is. Not generosity, not love, not strength. It's avoidance disguised as virtue. The person who carries everything is running from something, and they're using other people's needs as the perfect excuse to never stop running. Let's go deeper. Let's look at the mechanics of this. How does someone become the person who carries everything? It doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow process. A series of small choices that compound over time. It starts young, usually in childhood. You learn that love is conditional, that approval must be earned, that being helpful makes you valuable, that being needed makes you safe. Maybe you had a parent who was overwhelmed, and you learned that making their life easier made them happy, and their happiness became your responsibility. Or maybe you had a sibling who got all the attention, and you learned that the way to be seen was to be useful, to be the one who didn't cause problems, the one who helped solve them. Or maybe your family was in crisis, financial stress, divorce, illness, and you became the parentified child, the one who took on responsibilities that weren't yours to carry, who learned that your needs didn't matter as much as everyone else's, who discovered that being strong meant being silent about your own pain. Whatever the origin, the pattern gets set, and it follows you into adulthood, into your relationships, into your career, into every area of your life. You become the person people lean on, and at first, it feels good. It feels like purpose, like meaning, like proof that you matter. But then something shifts, the weight gets heavier, the demands get louder, and you realize you can't remember the last time someone asked how you were doing. Really asked. Not as a formality, but as a genuine inquiry into your inner world. because people stopped asking. They assumed you were fine. You're always fine. You're the strong one. And the strong one doesn't get to break down. The strong one doesn't get to be uncertain. The strong one doesn't get to need support. Because if the strong one falls apart, who's going to hold everything together? This is the trap. And it's invisible to the person inside it. Because from the outside, it looks like they're thriving. They're busy. They're needed. They're important. But inside, they're running on empty. And they've forgotten how to stop. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about something he called the will to power. The fundamental drive in human beings to assert and enhance their existence. But Nietzsche also understood that power can be distorted. That sometimes what looks like strength is actually a fear of weakness. That sometimes the person who appears most in control is the one most terrified of losing it. The person who carries everything has a distorted relationship with power. They believe their value comes from what they do for others, from how much they can handle, from how indispensable they can make themselves. But that's not power. That's codependency. That's a transaction where love is exchanged for labor, and the price keeps going up. Because here's what happens. The more you carry, the more people expect you to carry. They don't do it maliciously. They do it because you've trained them to rely on you. You've made yourself the solution to every problem, the answer to every question, the support for every crisis. And now, if you stop, the whole system collapses. Or at least, that's what you believe. But what if it doesn't? What if people are more capable than you give them credit for? What if your carrying isn't helping them grow, but preventing them from learning to carry themselves? What if your exhaustion isn't a badge of honor, but a symptom of a deeply unhealthy pattern? These are the questions the overburdened person never asks, because asking them would mean facing the truth. That maybe, just maybe, they're not carrying everything because they have to. They're carrying everything because they're afraid of what would happen if they didn't. Let's look at this through the lens of attachment theory. The person who carries everything often has what's called an anxious attachment style. They learned early that love is unreliable, that people leave, that the only way to keep someone close is to make yourself necessary. So they become indispensable. They become the person you can't live without. And in doing so, they trap themselves in a prison of their own making. Because if your worth is tied to your usefulness, then you can never rest. Rest means becoming useless. And useless means disposable. So you keep going, you keep carrying, you keep running out of time. Not because time is scarce, but because you've filled every available moment with other people's needs. Because empty time is dangerous. Empty time means facing yourself. And that's the one thing you've been avoiding all along. Jung talked about the process of individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are, of integrating the shadow, of moving beyond the persona. But individuation requires something the overburdened person can't afford: solitude, reflection, the space to ask, who am I when I'm not needed? And that question is terrifying, because the answer might be, I don't know. And not knowing feels like non-existence, so they keep carrying, they keep performing, they keep proving their worth through exhaustion. And they call it love. They call it responsibility. They call it being a good person. But it's not. It's survival. And survival isn't the same as living. Think about the hero archetype again. Every hero's journey includes a moment of isolation, a descent into the underworld, a confrontation with death. Not literal death, but ego death. The death of who you thought you were. And in that death, something new can emerge, something truer, something that doesn't need to earn its right to exist. But the person who carries everything never gets to that moment because they're too busy, too needed, too committed to holding the world together. They're Atlas with the sky on their shoulders. And they've forgotten that Atlas was being punished, that carrying the world wasn't meant to be eternal, that even gods need rest. The existentialist philosopher Simone de Beauvoir wrote about the concept of bad faith, the lie we tell ourselves to avoid the anxiety of freedom. And the person who carries everything is living in bad faith. They're telling themselves they have no choice, that they must keep carrying, that their exhaustion is unavoidable. But it's not. It's a choice they're making, a choice to avoid the harder truth, that they could stop, they could say no, they could prioritize themselves. But doing so would mean giving up the identity they've built, and that feels like death. So they keep running. They keep running out of time, because time is the currency they trade for love, for approval, for the illusion of safety, and they're going bankrupt. But they can't stop spending, because stopping means confronting the debt. Let's talk about boundaries, or rather, the absence of them. The person who carries everything has porous boundaries. They can't tell where they end and others begin. Your problem becomes my problem. Your pain becomes my responsibility. Your needs become my emergency. And in that enmeshment, they lose themselves. Boundaries aren't walls. They're not about shutting people out. They're about knowing what's yours to carry and what's not. They're about understanding that helping someone doesn't mean fixing them, that supporting someone doesn't mean sacrificing yourself, that love doesn't require self-erasure. But the overburdened person never learned this. They learned the opposite, that boundaries are selfish, that saying no is cruel, that taking care of yourself means you don't care about others. And so they give, and give, and give, until there's nothing left, until they're running on fumes, until they can't remember the last time they did something just for themselves. And the tragic irony is this: the people they're carrying often don't appreciate it, not because they're ungrateful, but because they've come to expect it. The overburdened person has trained everyone around them to take their labor for granted, to assume they'll always say yes, to never question whether they're okay, because they're always okay. They have to be. That's their role. But roles are exhausting, especially when the role is all-consuming, when there's no separation between the performance and the person, when you've become so identified with being the carrier that you've forgotten you're allowed to be carried too. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, believed that human life is essentially suffering, that desire is endless and satisfaction is fleeting. But Schopenhauer also believed in compassion, in recognizing the suffering of others. And here's where it gets complicated for the person who carries everything, because their compassion is real. Their desire to help is genuine. But it's also a trap, because they've made compassion their entire identity. And identity, once solidified, becomes a cage. You can't just be compassionate sometimes. You have to be compassionate all the time. You can't help some people. You have to help everyone. You can't say, "I'm too tired today," because the tired version of you isn't the real you. The real you is the one who pushes through, who finds a way, who never lets anyone down, except yourself. You let yourself down constantly, but that doesn't count, because you don't count. This is the shadow side of altruism, the dark underbelly of service, when helping others becomes a compulsion, when it's no longer a choice but a necessity, when you need to be needed more than you need to be well. And the world enables this. The world loves a martyr, a self-sacrificing hero, someone who will carry the weight, so everyone else can walk lighter. The world doesn't ask if the martyr is okay, because martyrs aren't supposed to be okay. Suffering is their purpose, and if they stop suffering, they lose their meaning. But here's the truth nobody wants to say out loud. Martyrdom isn't noble. It's a symptom of deep-seated unworthiness, of the belief that you don't deserve rest unless you've earned it through suffering, that you don't deserve love unless you've proven yourself through service, that your existence needs justification, and the only justification that counts is how much you can give. So you give everything: your time, your energy, your peace, your health, your dreams, your life. And you tell yourself it's worth it. Because look at all the people you're helping. Look at all the crises you're averting. Look at how much you matter. But you don't matter to yourself. You only matter in relation to others. And that's not mattering. That's disappearing. Jung called this phenomenon the inflation of the ego. When you identify too strongly with a role, you lose touch with the self beneath it. The ego expands to fill the space where the self should be. And the person who carries everything has an inflated ego disguised as humility. They think they're being selfless, but really, they're making themselves the center of everyone's universe, the indispensable one, the irreplaceable one, the one without whom everything falls apart. But what if everything doesn't fall apart? What if people adapt? What if they find other sources of support? What if your absence creates space for them to grow? What if the most loving thing you could do is stop carrying them? These questions feel like betrayal to the overburdened person, because their entire identity is built on the opposite belief. That love means carrying. That strength means enduring. That value means being needed. And if those equations are wrong, then what have they been doing all this time? What has all the exhaustion been for? This is the crisis, the moment of reckoning, when the carrier realizes they've been running out of time, not because time is scarce, but because they've been spending it on everyone except themselves. And now there's a debt, a massive, unpayable debt of self-neglect, of unmet needs, of suppressed desires, of a life unlived, and the bill is coming due, in the form of burnout, in the form of resentment, in the form of physical illness, in the form of relationships that feel hollow, in the form of waking up one day and realizing you don't know who you are anymore, because you've spent so long being what everyone needs that you forgot to be what you need. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz, wrote about the search for meaning. He said that those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. But what if your why is external? What if your meaning comes entirely from others? What if you have no internal why? Then the how becomes unbearable, because you're living for everyone but yourself. And that's not living. That's existing in service to an identity that's slowly killing you. The person who carries everything needs to hear something they've probably never been told. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to prioritize yourself. You are allowed to be unavailable. You are allowed to disappoint people. You are allowed to let things fall apart. You are allowed to not have all the answers. You are allowed to be human. But permission isn't enough, because even when given permission, the overburdened person feels guilty. Selfish. Wrong, because their entire moral framework is built around self-sacrifice, and dismantling that framework feels like becoming a bad person. But it's not. It's becoming a whole person, a person with needs, with limits, with a self that deserves care. The recovery process isn't simple. It requires grief. Grief for the time lost, for the relationships built on unequal labor, for the version of yourself that only existed to serve others. It requires anger. Anger at the people who took without giving, at the systems that exploited your goodness, at yourself for allowing it. And it requires something even harder. Sitting with the fear that if you stop carrying, you'll discover you're not actually needed, that people will move on without you, that your worst fear will be confirmed, that you were only valuable for what you could do, not for who you are. But here's what happens when you face that fear. You discover it's not entirely true. Some people do leave, the ones who were only there for what you provided. The transactional relationships, the emotional vampires, they disappear. And it hurts. But it also clears space. Space for relationships built on mutuality, on respect, on genuine connection rather than dependence. And you also discover something surprising, that some people were waiting for you to stop carrying them, that your overfunctioning was preventing their growth, that by stepping back, you're actually giving them a gift, the gift of their own agency, their own strength, their own capacity to handle their lives. And most importantly, you discover yourself, the self that exists independent of utility, the self that has interests, desires, dreams, boundaries, the self that can rest without guilt, that can say no without explanations, that can exist without justification, the self that was always there, buried under years of carrying. This is what Jung meant by individuation, not becoming someone new, but uncovering who you've always been, beneath the roles, beneath the expectations, beneath the exhaustion. There's a person there, a person who matters, not because of what they do, but because they are. The ones who carry everything are always running out of time because they're living backwards. They're trying to earn their existence through action. But existence doesn't need to be earned. You already exist. You already matter. You already deserve rest. You already deserve love. Not because you've proven yourself, but because you're here. Time isn't the problem. The problem is the belief that your time belongs to everyone but you. That other people's needs are always more important than yours. That rest is something you have to deserve rather than something you need. And until you challenge those beliefs, you'll keep running. Keep exhausting yourself. Keep wondering why there's never enough time. When the truth is, there's plenty of time. You've just been giving it all away. Subscribe to Hero Psyche for more explorations into the patterns that shape our lives. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next deep dive into the psychology beneath the surface. Because understanding these patterns isn't just interesting, it's necessary. It's how you stop repeating them. It's how you break free. The person who carries everything doesn't need better time management. They need to understand why they're carrying in the first place, what they're avoiding, what they're proving, what they're afraid will happen if they stop. And once they understand that, once they face that, they can finally put down the weight. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until one day they realize they're not running anymore. They're walking at their own pace, with their own time, for their own life. And it's not selfish. It's survival. It's self-respect. It's finally becoming the person they were always meant to be. Not the carrier, not the martyr, not the strong one. Just themselves. Whole, rested, free.